The truth is, American and Russian military aircraft intercept each other really just about all the time in places all over the world, as each respective nation's tactical aircraft conduct exercises just near the sovereign territory of the other. But the biggest difference you can expect out of Russian and American aviators in these interactions can be best summed up in a single word, and that's professionalism. You see, American fighter pilots train extensively for these intercepts and take them very seriously. The last thing an American pilot wants is for their actions to cause an international incident that could snowball into war with another nuclear power. But Russian fighter pilots are not nearly as well trained, not nearly as disciplined, and not nearly as professional. And that's not just my word for it, that's the term used by American defense officials time after these intercepts, where they describe Russian pilot behavior as unsafe and unprofessional. And this video from just last week perfectly encapsulates why. Now, this intercept took place off the coast of Alaska on September 23rd, when NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, identified 4 Russian military aircraft entering into the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. Now, it's important to note that the Air Defense Identification Zone is not American territory. It's a buffer, if you will, where any nation's aircraft entering into this area without announcing themselves well ahead of time would see American and likely Canadian fighters scrambled to intercept and identify them before they got close enough to pose a threat to America or Canada, for that matter. And that's exactly what happened on the 23rd, with 4 U.S. Air Force F-16s and an undisclosed reconnaissance aircraft scrambled to go intercept and escort these Russian aircraft. Now, as that American formation arrived, they identified 2 Russian Tu-95 Bear bombers, long-range strategic nuclear-capable aircraft, escorted by 2 Su-35 fighters. Now again, these sorts of intercepts happen all the time, and while these Russian aircraft were heading toward American airspace, they were still over international waters. So, as you can see in this footage released by NORAD, one of those F-16s took up position in a loose formation of sorts with those Russian aircraft, making sure they were aware the F-16s were there, and making sure they knew not to enter into American airspace. But then, as the video goes on, a Russian Su-35 pulls up alongside the F-16 and then dives across in front of it in a very unsafe and unprofessional maneuver that forced the F-16 pilot to change course to avoid flying right through that Russian fighter's jet wash. And this is not an uncommon occurrence. You can find videos of Russian fighters doing things just like this all over YouTube. Heck, last year, a Russian Su-27 crashed into an American MQ-9 Reaper over the Black Sea while it was trying to dump fuel on it. And then Russian media had a field day, first trying to pretend that they didn't collide, and then pretending the collision was on purpose. Russia even gave that pilot a medal. This is the sort of professionalism we're talking about when it comes to the Russian Air Force. And wouldn't you know it, just a few months after the US publicized that event, US Air Force Central Command reported that Russian pilots had been flying less unsafely, though they were still being unprofessional, closing to much closer to American drones than any aircraft normally would following international norms, but nonetheless not trying to crash into them. And then, by October of that same year, when the US deployed F-35s to the region, US Air Force Central Command reported a significant downturn in both the aggression and the unsafe behavior of Russian fighter pilots in the area. Almost as though these Russian pilots may not appreciate the scope of the conflict they could potentially be inciting, but they certainly understand that they don't want to be shot down themselves. And while there is certainly a very reasonable argument to be made that this aggressive and unprofessional behavior is encouraged and potentially even directed by Russian command elements, but even if that is the case, the lack of experience in Russian pilots still makes this an incredibly unsafe and unprofessional act. As we've discussed in past videos, your average Russian fighter pilot gets about half the seat time in their aircraft per month as compared to their American colleagues. And not only that, but Russian fighter pilots regularly arrive at their combat units with just 200 combined flight hours across all platforms. And to give you a sense of comparison, American fighter pilots regularly average between 200 and 250 hours of flight time before they even find out what aircraft they'll be assigned to fly. In other words, these aggressive maneuvers are not being performed by aviation experts, pilots who know their platforms inside and out and are certain that nothing bad is going to happen. This is not the behavior of a Formula One race car driver, it's the behavior of a 20-year-old in his dad's Mustang who blows by you on the highway and then throws on his hazard flashers to suggest that he won a race nobody else was participating in. And while I'd be the first one to tell you that I'd love to see American fighter pilots flex a little muscle and even show off a bit during these intercepts, I recognize that the stakes are simply too high, especially in the midst of an ongoing war in Ukraine and the Russian government regularly threatening nuclear war against the West. And that's why these interactions are characterized as not just unsafe, but unprofessional. Because actual professional military aviators understand that there's a whole lot more on the line during these intercepts than their own ego and bragging rights. And Russian fighter pilots still don't seem to understand that. Then maybe they never will, at least until one of these maneuvers goes wrong and they actually collide with an American aircraft with a crew on board, creating an international incident that could lead to conflict. And at that point, well, Russia will jump straight to the find out phase of their air power learning exercise.